So lately I've been doing a lot of research on dreaming for creative inspiration. And today I'm talking to Ben Gabelman, who is an animator and a motion designer who uses his dreams a lot in his creative process.
Right now I'm a animator at Nickelodeon. I've been there for about 1 year. Before that, I guess to back all the way up, I graduated from SCAD in 2012, spent time in New York, working in New York, and then I moved to Atlanta in 2015 and continued sort of my career journey and working in advertising and music videos and broadcast and just internet, anything video basically. And after leaving advertising, I started my own freelance business during the pandemic. And so I was able to really expand a lot of my motion design, animation skills to a little bit of a broader range of things, which was really fun. So I was able to work on some internet shows for Nike and some full experiences like musician / MMA experiences and music videos. I did a full K-pop lyric video, which was pretty bonkers. And now I'm at Nickelodeon and working as a senior animator. So that's my whole career has sort of been like this continuum between like personal creative fulfillment and commercial. And definitely I feel like I'm like lately I've been pretty deep into the commercial end of things. And that's why I'm so excited to talk to you about dreaming and my dream journaling, because that to me, that's like the peak of my kind of personal creative fulfillment. And I think that's kind of where a lot of that potential for that lies. That sort of subconscious inspiration or unconscious inspiration does bubble up into my commercial creative process. And I think dialing that up is beneficial. You kind of learn as a designer to make something pretty quickly under pressure that fits a very specific set of guides. Sometimes you are able to do things like, free association, like word association, or taking a hot shower, stepping away, and just sort of letting the good ideas come from wherever they come from. And I feel like dreaming is sort of once you start paying attention to it, it's really a window into those lower parts or unconscious parts of yourself. And so those other things that kind of help open the door for that to come into design work is always really, I don't know, it's kind of like a dream of mine or like an aspiration of mine to do that more.
So how did you get started loving your dreams and tapping into that for your own personal creative process and just for anything else that you feel like your dreams have brought to you?
I always have had pretty natural dream recall. And I think that I actually have my oldest dream journal with me here. And I think I was looking at it this morning. I think my earliest recorded dream is in 2008. So that was right before I went to college. It all kind of started though. I remember a semi-lucid dream that basically started my entire career, can be kind of linked back to this single, probably 2 dreams. And the first dream was a dream where I became semi-lucid, but it had a lot of the emotional sort of hallmarks of a lucid dream where, that kind of freedom and elation and excitement was present in that dream. And then there was a second dream that was much more involved. And that dream had some really beautiful imagery in it. And I just I woke up from the dream and I just had to I couldn't not think about it. I was really drawn to this emotional content that I felt in the dream. And I kept trying to recreate it with drawing and painting and all these different mediums. And I just couldn't quite get there. But that dream kind of launched me on this journey to pull something out of the dream world into waking life. I'll just really briefly tell you about the dream. I know that talking about dreams is not always that exciting because so much of the content is
very exciting to me.
Okay.
I love it. I could talk about dreams all day.
Okay. So that dream it was a pretty long, subjectively, it felt pretty long. But the dream kind of ended where I was walking along this stony wall that was a retaining wall for a beach. And it was nighttime and it was winter. And I was looking out over this beach at night and there were all these little tiny sailboats, toy sailboats in the waves, hundreds of them. And that was the gist of it, which doesn't sound very impressive, but there was a really strong emotional component to that dream. And so I started doing these little thumbnail watercolors to try to capture the dream. And it was sort of the scene of this beach. And for some reason I started drawing like the figure of a woman on the beach, which was kind of interesting because there was no woman in the dream, but for some reason that like emotionally felt like right. And I kept making these little drawings, and I had this drawing teacher at the time, this guy named James DeAndrea, who's an amazing drafts person. And he was teaching me how to like draw in like a very classical way. And so we're doing all of these like still life drawings, like, and he was looking at these little like dinky watercolors. And he said this thing to me that was really interesting. He said, you know, Ben, sometimes an idea drawing isn't right for a single idea. Like sometimes things work better as like a sequence of images or like an animation, which is interesting because I would go on to become an animator. I didn't even realize it at the time. But kind of fast forward, I went to SCAD. I kept journaling my dreams. I went to SCAD to become a painter because I wanted to, you know, again, bring this sort of emotional content to life. And I thought that painting was the best way to do that, again, through sort of juxtaposition of realities, surrealism, just the emotional sort of component that painting can and does convey. But as you know, but the listeners may not know, if there are listeners to this, I am in a wheelchair. And I remember going to like a alumni sort of talk, this woman who had become a painter, graduated from SCAD and become a painter. And she said, if you're going to be a painter, you have to become a bartender. Everybody has to become a bartender, and you have to know that when you're graduating. And that kind of struck me because I was like, that's not like a possibility for me. Like, I'm not interested in like becoming a bartender, like being in a wheelchair and all those things. And so I kind of knew I had to pivot because I wanted to be able to support myself financially, but also continue exploring this creative world of dreaming. And right around the same time, I discovered motion design. I mean, at the time, there's a lot of exciting things happening in the field where you had people like Adam Galt, who was a motion designer, doing a lot of these really like taking illustration and animating, sort of like a visual poetry sort of a thing. And there was like so much emotional content, so much surrealism, so much of what I wanted to do was embodied in work like that. And then at the same time, there was this work being done that was like, you know, shoe commercials and like Coca-Cola ads and all of these things that were clearly on like the money-making end of things. And all of that was combined in this umbrella that was motion design. So it's like, all right, this is it. Like, this is definitely where I want to go. And that's how I ultimately became a motion designer.
That's cool.
That's life, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's cool that your dreams helped you get there. I feel like dreams are so powerful and like showing us our direction in life. Do you always keep a dream journal consistently? How's your practice like in general?
These days, it's pretty sparse. I'll write a dream down maybe once or twice a month. I wanted to ask you about this as well, because I've used two different apps. I started using my phone to record my dreams. I had the one app was called Dreamer and the other app was called Dreambase. And this ended up happening with both of them, but the developer stopped updating the app and I lost all of my dreams.
I would be like, that's like my biggest fear. The app that I use is really good. I highly recommend.
What's it called?
It's called, do you have iPhone? It's called Oniri. It's only on iPhone. And I love it because they've actually been developing it. But what I do, because I'm paranoid of that, I always export my PDFs like once a month. It'll export you a PDF of all your dreams, but it saves to a cloud. So even if you log in on another phone or whatever, it saves. I still export it because I'm I cherish.
You're a professional.
Yeah. And I would be so upset if that happened. So I can't imagine, because that's so much interpersonal stuff that you just want to cherish forever.
For sure. The one thing I loved about Dreambase in particular was that they have a function where you can tag the dream to keep track of dream symbols.
Oniri has that. I just put the name in there. It's pretty in depth. Like, you can pick your feelings, you can pick the objects, you can search by keywords. It's really cool.
That's great. Because one thing I really loved about creating the database of dream signs was seeing the frequency and patterns that you didn't even know were there. Like, for some reason, I had a lot of snakes come up a lot, which is really weird for me. Like, there are signs that I expect, like, I know water is a big one for me and nature is a big one for me, but the snake thing was really weird because there's no snakes in my life. I don't think about snakes.
You could approach it by figuring out what snakes mean to you, because some snakes might be something cool to one person and something scary and anxiety provoking to another.
I think that's really, I agree. I think your own interpretation of your dreams is the most important interpretation.
So another question I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you were in a wheelchair. Are your dreams, do you ever walk, or are you always in a wheelchair in your dreams?
That's such a great question. To give you like a brief overview, like basically I have a degenerative neuromuscular disease. So I could walk until I was about in my early 20s, and then it became progressively harder. And now I'm non-ambulatory. I don't walk. I just use a wheelchair. And dreaming has really been my sort of emotional processing of what's going on with my body has really come through in my dreams throughout that entire journey. So I remember in high, and this is going to get a little bit personal. So in high school, I remember I had a really hard time. It was the first time I ever used a wheelchair, but I could still walk. And I would have these dreams of being like stuck on the ground, like in public, and not being able to get up, like having to crawl and everybody else was walking. And I think that was like a lot of my emotional response, like deep emotional response to the feeling of being in a wheelchair or using a wheelchair. An interesting kind of overall theme that has emerged on this topic is that there was like a substantial lag between me being in a wheelchair. Like I would still have dreams of walking for years. And then slowly that has evolved to now I'm dreaming as I'm in a wheelchair, or I'm dreaming that I think it's the experience of being in a wheelchair where I'm sort of floating at the eye level of that where I'm at in my waking life. But I do occasionally have these really beautiful dreams where I'm walking, and they're the most beautiful, like thrilling experience where it's like, I'll be like looking straight down at my feet and I'm like walking, like usually in nature, and I can feel like the ground underneath my feet and I feel my weight, going through my legs. And it's just like it's hard to find a word to describe it. Like, the only thing I can compare it to is like being on ecstasy. It's like that sort of like intense feeling. And so, yeah, so those are really cool dreams. I had a dream once where I was like running through the streets of Savannah, and that was like amazing. I was just like kind of running through the night, and that was really beautiful. But I do think that a lot of my focus on dreaming and a lot of my attention to some of the deeper, more difficult emotions that come out in dreaming is a result of my illness, experiencing these sort of shifts in my physical experience day to day. And I think that's largely what to kind of segue into like my when I was doing my own thesis at SCAD, I think that's where that film came out of. So, when I knew I had to have this thesis for SCAD, I knew that I wanted to focus on dreaming. I mean, I knew that I had some really interesting dreams, but I had no idea when I wanted to make it. As you know, it's pretty daunting to say you can do anything you want and you just have to get it done. So I started by going back into my dream journal and pulling out, seeing like, this is pre-iPhone day. I didn't have an iPhone or anything, which is amazing that world existed, but it did. And I went back into my dream journal and I started copying like really interesting passages or trying to look for if there's any reoccurring symbolism. And I was able to pull out some pretty interesting themes. The most prominent theme that spoke to me was this theme of encountering my own death, like encountering my own dead body, for lack of a more poetic term. And that was really fertile ground, I think, for to get started. So we had this theme of encountering my dead self. I also had these objects that would be in these dreams, and they're sort of like, I don't know if you want to call them talisman, like that's kind of a woo-woo term, but sort of like interesting objects that were symbols for something much greater for themselves. So I had like this weird fishing lure or like a weapon, or like there was one dream where there was like all of these marbles in the banks of this river, like things like this, lots of little things here and there. And so I started having some pretty strong imagery that I knew I wanted to incorporate. I started drawing some like preliminary, like I had a couple scenes in mind specifically around my own death, but I still didn't have a way to like weave together a narrative. And at the time I was lucky enough to have this professor called Austin Shaw, and he was very interested in narrative building and storytelling. And he introduced me to Joseph Campbell, the work of Joseph Campbell, and sort of the hero's journey. And through studying that, I was able to help kind of pull out a greater narrative, themes of death and rebirth, sort of the hero's journey of leaving home, overcoming adversity, and returning home as like a fully realized individual, these sorts of things. So I was able to kind of help use that lens with some of the dream content that I had pulled out in the imagery to flesh out like a greater narrative. But again, it was really about sort of, it's hard to explain. It's almost about like giving enough room for my unconscious to make the narrative for me, like being able to define like these are the prompts that that I'm going to feed into like the machine learning network or whatever metaphor you want to use, and then letting like sort of the unknown part do what it will with those things. So for example, I had like these little thumbnails. I had a couple like key thumbnails that I drew out on like 3x5 note cards. And I just started drawing like a ton of stuff on the note cards, and then I put them out on the table and was just kind of rearranging them to see what the visual story might look like. Once the general sort of content was mapped out, then you can start with the design process and developing the aesthetic and all of the other things that kind of help flesh out the story.
We'll be right back.
Are you interested in yoga, meditation, and reading spiritual self-help books? Do you admire spiritual teachers such as Oprah, Gabrielle Bernstein, or Eckhart Tolle? Now let me ask you, do you find yourself contemplating life's biggest, most mysterious questions? Me too, which is why I started the Cultivating Spiritual Curiosity podcast. On this show, I talk with spiritual leaders about everything: yoga, mental health, therapy, intuition, spirit guides, law of attraction, mediumship, and so much more. Click the links below to join our eye-opening conversations.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I remember seeing all those elements in your video. I've seen it so many times. They played it in class.
That's so funny.
So highly of you. Yeah, no, for real.
That's so cool. Yeah, one of the things that I was kind of reminded of when I was going through my notes for the film was I used to be lucid quite a bit, and I would intentionally try to like interrogate my dream characters, because it's like you're talking to yourself, but obviously it's not your conscious self. And so it's like, what does your self have to say? I had this one little like exchange it's pretty circular. It's like, I just asked a character, like, do you know that I'm dreaming? And they responded with, well, what are you dreaming? And then I responded with, I'm dreaming of you. I mean, nothing really like it's more comical than anything like that. The one other thing that I was able to like, again, like kind of pull out, I think those conversations are almost, exceedingly interesting, because that is something that you're able to almost directly pull from your dream life with that is pretty solid. And I remember there's this one really weird little passage that I have in here. It's almost like a poem or something that a dream character told me. And it said, it's impossible not to fall in, and it's impossible not to get wet. It's impossible not to get wet again after you dry. I don't know what that means. I don't think it means anything, but
no, I kind of like it.
Yeah, I know it's kind of, it's actually a little bit embarrassing to read out loud, but
no, don't be embarrassed. I totally understand. I'm obsessed with dreams and all the weird things. I love doing what you were saying, just like asking dream characters things, because you never know what they're going to say. And it always just sounds so like interesting.
I felt like, I remember when I was in college, I got in a rhythm where I was able to wake myself up after pretty much every single dream. And I remember one week I was looking back at my entries, and there was an entry that like, I did not, usually when you're going back, you kind of are like, oh, okay, I remember this. Mm-hmm. But there was an entry that I just had no recollection of at all. And it was like it wasn't even in my handwriting. Like it was in like a weird. Yeah. And it wasn't anything crazy in there, but it was just really, I don't know. It was pretty interesting just to be able to tap into something that was so removed from your conscious state.
That rarely happens to me as well, where I'm like, I don't remember this dream. And I will sit there for like 10 minutes trying to remember it, because it's kind of frustrating.
I'm curious about what your experience has been in terms of like any kind of like paranormal things with dreams. Is that an interest of you at all? Or?
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's part of why I have the podcast. And I've had a lot. Like I've had premonition type situations with just random things, but very, very specific, like the exact way I was doing something in a dream with the person. And then in my waking life, like a month later, I'm in that exact same position. Like, whoa, I dreamt of this. You said that exact thing, and I pulled it up.
Wait, that's happened to me. Yeah.
It's happened to me on multiple occasions, some more specific and others, some more metaphorical, but it's happened to me and a lot of people I talk to. And yeah, just different things like that. Also, when my grandmother passed, I had a dream that she was telling me something about our family or something I didn't know. And then I woke up and I told my dad, and he was like, yeah, that's true. Like that did happen. And I had no idea. So that's something beyond, I felt like it was beyond my subconscious because I didn't know that before.
Yeah, when I was younger, I had the sort of premonition thing. And I'm not a very spiritual, I mean, I am, and I'm not, I think I'm definitely more of a materialist, and I try to be pretty like credulous and really like not to jump to conclusions as much as is possible. But there are things that I've dreamt that I can't explain. I don't know what it is, but there's just a couple very strange experiences that kind of, I'm like, okay, well, there's something that's pretty spooky about what's happening. And when I was younger, I did used to dream and have like that dream would happen later on. And like you said, it's like a very specific phrase or action that happens. And you're able to be like, oh my God, like next this thing is going to happen. And then it happens and you're like, oh my God, like this isn't just like some weird, like trick of the mind. Like this feels very, very real.
Yeah, exactly. It's so weird. And I think it's just a thing about time and space and just how maybe, like you said, it's not like this crazy spiritual thing. I think it's just about how our reality is different than what we would think it is. It's just how it's structured. And yeah, our dreams are kind of like a tool. They'll show us things and, give us hints of stuff, and just to kind of keep that like fire inside us awake of like, okay, there's more to our subconscious minds.
Can I tell you about the most sort of spooky dream I've had?
Yeah, please do.
Or actually, this isn't a dream I had even. Sorry, I get confused, but it's the most spooky experience I've had with dreams in general. So when I was at SCAD, I would see a personal trainer, and one day we actually became pretty close, like emotionally, we were pretty close. And she was really upset one morning, and she was like, I just had this dream that I had a student with me, and we were stretching out like your leg. And I said, hey, take Ben's left leg, like but be careful, that's his broken leg, which is like weird because it's like, obviously it's a dream, like tense grammar. It doesn't make sense. That's his broken leg. Nobody would be performing like a stretch on a broken leg. Like it's silly, but like, and I was like, oh, it's okay. Like, it's just a dream, like whatever. Like we both like totally forgot about it. And then 6 months later, I ended up breaking my left leg, and I didn't even think about the dream or anything. Right. And I went through the healing process back home in New York, and came back to SCAD to go to school. And I started seeing the trainer again, and we're doing our thing. And then one morning, she started having a student. And then one morning we're like on the treatment table, and she like looks to the student in the same way that she had described. And she was like, hey, like now you can take Ben's left leg and stretch it, but be careful, that's his broken leg. Like the exact sentence. Like, and I was just like, hey, do you remember this thing that happened like a year ago? And she like confirmed that, yeah, like she recalls it. And that's like the closest that I've been able to like prove that there's something, because obviously like our minds are really hard to know. So it's easy to feel like, okay, well, maybe I'm misremembering the details, or I'm conflating things, or looking for patterns where they aren't. But that, to me, like personally, that's it, that like there's not much that can explain why that wasn't like somehow like a premonition or like something spooky.
Premonition for sure. It seems
yeah.
That is interesting. So fascinating. And like, it can be spooky, but like I've shifted from like the spooky mentality to like, that's freaking cool. Like, that's just awesome.
Right. Yeah, no, I love it. When I say spooky, I just mean like metaphysical. Yeah. Like, yeah. Without like prescribing like a spiritual or tradition to it or anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's cool. We talked about your premonition dream and all the crazy dream experiences that we've had, which is cool. I mean, it's part of the reason why we love dream work so much, because there's just so much we don't understand. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your work in motion media and like surrealism. Like, what type of techniques do you draw? Like, how do you draw inspiration from that for your SCAD film specifically, but just in general?
I think that the first most obvious one that we touched on a little bit is like drawing on dream symbols. And then I think that the overall goal of that, though, is tap into our unconscious. And so I think dreaming is a tool to do that. And obviously that could be really powerful for understanding ourselves as personalities and experiencers of the world. I think that the other area where that lends itself to is exploring the human narrative, more specifically things like the hero's journey or sort of archetypical stories that people's minds tend to be drawn towards, because we're all so different, but yet we're all human, and we have evolved under the same conditions. So we all kind of have some of these kind of like basic things. I don't know if you want to like extrapolate that like as wildly out into something like the collective unconscious, whether anybody subscribes to that or not, but it's certainly fascinating. So I think that's one way. I think the second way that I usually sort of trying to do this is through sort of like the literal interpretation of the visuals in dreams. So I love how things can be so blurry, for lack of a better term. And so it's really just the impression of an object sometimes. And so helping to recreate that or juxtapose foreground and background elements or colors, or I think that's something that I really enjoy in work. And again, it's also like adding things like sound design and really anything that can help kind of recreate the emotional content that comes in. This is sort of an interesting question for me to answer, because it's not like right now I am really steeped in sort of like commercial world. And I'm so excited that you like brought me in to talk, because this is not something that I kind of need personally, is to like revisit some of these more meaningful conversations. This may or may not be meaningful, but a couple of years ago, I started seeing a hypnotherapist. You know, they're a clinical psychologist, but they specialized in hypnotherapy. And I remember I went into this guy's office, and he had this little picture behind him of like, I don't know, it felt like 1920s black and white, like of like a worker down in like the engine room of a ship or something. And he had this giant like wrench, and he was like kind of like toiling to like kind of torque this wrench. My first session, he sort of, we sat down and he pointed to the picture, and he was like, so in our work together, like we are concerned with our sort of conscious experience, but where we're going is here into like the boiler room, into the sort of the guts or the underground of beneath our experience. And like that whole experience of working through hypnotherapy with him, I feel like it's a very similar kind of delving into like very similar territory that dreams are. And I think being able to leverage that part of ourselves is sort of key for true creative work that will resonate not only with you, but if it's really accurately pulled, or if you're able to get really good at pulling content from that unconscious part of ourselves, I think that it has the potential to really resonate with everyone. What do you like? How are you doing this? If I flip the question on you, like, how are you using your dreams?
For me, it's kind of similar. Like I'll get, even in just like a regular dream, I'll have an idea, or I'll see something that I'll wake up and it just feels very prominent to me. Like, oh, this is something I could turn this into a project, or, it gives me an idea for something. And then I'll always write it down and like sit on it. But what I do a lot is I work with my lucid dreams. So if I have something specific that I want to do, or I have a blockage or something, like, with storyboarding, it's happened to me. Like, I don't really know how to put this together, or like something like that. And it's also happened to me with like technical stuff. Like, how do I do this on Photoshop? And then in my dream, if I'll get lucid, I'll kind of like play around with it, like just pretend, practice, or even painting or whatever, I'm working on. And then I'll just feel like I understand it better. And sometimes I've had like lucid dreams, like I said, with the Photoshop, where I didn't know how to do something on Photoshop. And then the dream just showed me how to do it. And I woke up and I knew how to do it. And that was it felt really weird, but I was like, my dream helped me get through this. So after that experience, I started to do it more. And yeah, honestly, just paying attention to my dreams is just like the overall way.
That's so cool. Yeah, I'm jealous. I have a friend he actually lives next door to me, and he's also a motion designer. His name is David Dodge. And he dreams, he tells me that he's a rollerblader. And so he tells me that he'll often work in his dreams. Like he'll work through, he doesn't use the language of lucidity or any of this stuff that we're talking about here. He's just like, yeah, man, I'm like, if I'm having a problem in life, I'll like dream about it and fix the problem in my dream. And like, he has like examples a lot of times with rollerblading, like trying to like do a certain new trick in rollerblading. And usually if he's struggling, he'll do it in his dream and then he'll be able to do it.
Cool. Like your brain doesn't know the difference between practicing something like a skill and like the same neural pathways of like building that muscle memory it happens the same way in your dreams.
What's your current like protocol? I was listening to some episodes of your podcast. I think he was just generally researching lucidity. But I mean, one thing that I have kind of been really interested in is some of like the techniques that you're like, when I learned to lucid dream, I learned from like exploring the world of lucid dreaming. And that was really it. And now it seems like things like supplementation and like even hardware is becoming, and even like the literature seems to be shifting a little bit about what's recommended. Like when I was learning, it was like wild, mild.
And I talk about this all the time. I think the main thing is that there's so many techniques and so many things you can do. There's supplements, there's this and that. But what it really is about is finding your own personal dream practice. Like find what works for you. It's a lot of trial and error. Like I still do wake back to bed sometimes. But for me, what really makes a difference is like setting an intention. And I guess that kind of goes hand in hand with mild, which is the mnemonic induction of lucid dreams. You know, I kind of just tell myself affirmations like I want to dream about this, or I'm calling on this person, or, you know, I want clarity on this situation, whatever. You know, that intention makes a big difference because whatever I'm thinking about as I'm falling asleep, I try to do it until I am knocked out, you know. And then if I do wake back to bed, I'll do the same thing. And wake back to bed works pretty well with me, especially in the mornings. Like everybody's different, you know, it depends how long you stay awake, what time you wake up, all this stuff. But something about waking up and not fully being awake and just slipping right back into REM sleep pretty much gets me lucid quite often. And it's like the dream journal too. And I'm like you, like I'm pretty in tune with my dreams, but if I stop really paying attention to it, nothing will happen for a while and I'll have these droughts. So it really just depends on how much thought and effort I put into it. Now that I'm doing the podcast and I talk about dreams all the time, like it's easier. Yeah, it really depends. And I've played around with supplements, like natural ones. There's like mugworts and teas and all this stuff. And then there's like chemical substances that just supplements what our body does naturally. And those work really well for me. I don't use them that often because I don't like to depend on stuff and just put random.
Right. Yeah,
but there's a lot of science behind it. Like I trust it. I know it's safe. Honestly, sometimes I just get lazy. But those are the main things that work for me. I'm trying to think of what else. The dream journal is a constant. I feel like if I'm writing them in my dreams kind of talk back.
I never had too much of a dialogue with them. I felt it was like pretty one-sided. Like the one thing that worked for me was always like state checks. Like that seemed to be like the one thing that really like almost always was able to like produce a lucid dream when I was doing that.
Yeah, most of my lucid dreams are because of reality checks. And even if I'm not like in my waking life, you know, I'll use my dream signs like we talked about earlier. Like, okay, I dream of being in the car a lot. So when I'm in the car, I'll do a reality check. I like to pull my finger or whatever. So nothing happens. But like 9 out of 10 times when I'm dreaming and I do this, it stretches like rubber. Like,
oh my God, stop.
Every time my finger goes like this. And that's how I know. So that's kind of like my go-to reality check. But yeah, that does help a lot. But I feel like it's all like combined, just like overall, the more different things I try, the more luck I'll have. Yeah.
That's so fun. I love that you're doing a podcast and making it happen. It's so exciting. Like podcasts are such a big part of my life as a motion designer. Like I listen to so many. So this is like such an exciting opportunity for me.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm glad you came on here. Like you've always inspired me too, even if you haven't realized it. So I'm going to continue.
I haven't. That's cool.
Yeah. But yeah.
Thanks, Amina. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.